So thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here tonight. As you can see from the picture behind me, I've been dreaming of what I do for a living for a very, very long time. As a kid, I was a very precocious naturalist. I was actually a little bit obsessed with nature. Photography became a very natural transition, the way to share my passion with friends and family. And like many of you in this room, I was very, very inspired by the pages of this magazine. So today what I want to do is to share a brief but very personal account of my own quest for a new narrative for nature. I moved to Mexico in my early 20s, more or less, and there I started to work in a conservation organization. I discovered the concept of wilderness, but that for someone from Spain, like I am, wilderness was non-existent. And I became very, very engaged with that idea. So at the beginning, my early work as a photographer really reflected on that concept, wilderness, the wild places, the highlands of Ethiopia. I wanted to see wildlife. I wanted to see the Southern Ocean, the penguins. And the more I traveled, the more I realized that the human footprint was advancing very, very quickly. And it's a very different thing to read it on the news or to see it on the TV than to see it with your own eyes. We were destroying the primary forest. We were mining the most pristine deserts of North America. We were building dams on the last free-flowing rivers of the planet. Even back then, which is quite a long time ago, climate change was already a reality. The glaciers were melting very fast. Vast tracts of wetlands were disappearing. And living in Mexico City, I have a constant reminder, especially when I flew in and out, of how we were encroaching nature. We can see here in this picture our very own water towers, the volcanoes, it's Iztaccíhuatl and Popocatépetl. They provide water for almost 25 million people here. So I was already sure that the beauty of nature approach in my photography was not working. And I had already tried the gloom and doom messaging, and it wasn't working either, because especially I was the first one getting depressed with it. And when you get depressed, when you get sad, you don't want to do things. So I thought I need a new narrative for nature. At that same time, there was this new hype brewing, this thing called multimedia. So I didn't know anyone in Mexico doing it, and I decided to give it a try. And it was like learning everything all over again. So I started doing video, writing scripts, recording sound, doing interviews, and with a couple of colleagues from Mexico, both of them extremely talented scientists, but extremely talented communicators too. We came up with this concept of the natural numbers, which basically explored, as the title says, the value of the planet in minutes. It was a short format, very dynamic, complex science stories that were easy to understand, combining photo, video, and motion graphics. But you have to think what it means for someone with my Victorian naturalist approach to nature. Talking about the economic value of the planet was almost like a sin. So a little bit to redeem myself, I went back to basics, this time with video, and I started working very intensively in blue-chip natural history films, filming, producing, creating stories about the beauty of our planet with a different language. And it was fantastic. I enjoyed so much this time of my life. But the truth is that I had been hiding a very, very ugly truth. In all these years as a storyteller, as a visual storyteller, I had something to confess. I wasn't very good working with people. I have spent a good amount of time trying to avoid people in the wilderness areas. And people were just a little speckle of dust in my photography, maybe to give a sense of scale. They were anonymous characters, devoid of any feelings, of voice, of any thoughts. And by recommendation of a National Geographic editor, I attended a photojournalism workshop in Missouri, a very prestigious one, and it was a brutal, steep learning curve for me. For the first time, I had to work in very intimate situations with a human character, trying to tell his story. This is Kenny Lloyd, the water foreman of Platte City, Missouri, and photographing moments that were terribly uncomfortable for me to be in front of. I cannot tell you how I felt the moment I had to shoot this. By the end of the workshop, one of the faculty members, a very respected photographer, he told me, you're talented, you are okay in the technical side, technically okay, zero empathy with your subjects. You know, and I consider myself an outgoing person, but it's true, I have to admit, that gentle push he gave me was exactly what I needed to try to get better on that. And suddenly empathy was starting to be an important part of my job. Having empathy with the scientists, that back then, scientists were not as cool as you are today, no? They were hiring us to photograph them to make them look cool. I was including the work of local communities. Okay, this is a confession. Local communities were an enemy for me. I was an urbanite working on wilderness. I didn't want to see any people in my reserves, no? And maybe all of this process was preparing me for one of the most hardest reminders on how important is empathy and compassion for the human being. In September 2017, we have a terrible earthquake in Mexico City. My neighborhood, several buildings collapsed, and for a week I didn't sleep, and I was both shooting a story for a Spanish journal and helping to clean the city, to clean the rubble. It was my own neighbors that I was shooting. I was dealing with their stories. It was seeing their faces. It was tremendous. And once again, empathy. There was a pattern with empathy that was starting to emerge. Empathy as a golden thread that united everything that I did as a conservationist and as a photographer. And I started to analyze in retrospective my work. And I saw how all the images that had become like the poster child of my stories, of my career, all of them had a strong element of empathy, a strong component. I will never forget the eyes of this female wolf. It's an alpha wolf, the first one to be reintroduced in the wild in Mexico after 50 years extinct. She was the leader of a small pack of young males, and I thinking when I was shooting, like, girl, you have such a responsibility. I was empathizing with that wolf. Same with this Barbary macaque. These guys are famous for the Gibraltar rock, but they are exotic species there. They belong to Morocco, to the cedar forest. And every time I would see this same individual, he was staring to the coast of Morocco. And I know it's naive, I know it's childish, but I kept thinking, oh, will he be missing something? Working with scientists, who do you feel more empathy with? Federico Mosquera, that has been trying for a week to capture just one dolphin, or the dolphin itself? Even with the monarch butterflies, which has been the most photographed subject of my career, I realized that after more than a decade working with them, portraying the pure beauty of this fantastic migration, the most relevant image that I have ever taken is one of a climatic disaster. A snowstorm in 2016 created havoc in the colony and 40% died. And I was seeing this with my own eyes. And how can you empathize with an insect? Well, you do. You do. These butterflies will never make it back. That is the power of images. And that's why I feel so lucky with the job I have. Images can open like some sort of direct channel into our consciousness. Images are easy to remember, much easier to remember than video. And images can become an icon. They have the potential to become an icon, and therefore they have the potential to become a driver for change. And I'm very lucky to be working with National Geographic thanks to a storytelling grant on my next project. No one represents the long-form, in-depth photojournalism than National Geographic. They do the best. in this field. And we will be comparing 3 different forests in Mexico. One on your left, you see it's a tropical forest in Calakmul in the south. In the center, you see the mountains of El Carmen in the north, and the mountains of Sierra Gorda in the center. 3 different ecosystems, very 3 different social situations. One is public land, the other is owned by a corporation, and the other is also public, but a little family has been working there for 4 generations to protect this forest. And what we want to achieve is to change the narrative for primary forest. We are losing our forests. And these positive stories can change the way we approach forest conservation and forest restoration. And this is done thanks to the power of stories. So a good story always has conflict. A good story can be disturbing. A good story can make us change, but especially and above everything, a good story can make us care. And if we care, we can change the world. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.